sleep for a few nights.
Yes. Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware podcast for November 2nd, 2021. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Uh, as you know, last week was a big week in the Pi world because of this little thing, the Raspberry Pi Zero 2W, and we had a special broadcast with Pi founder Eben Upton on Thursday to talk about it a little bit. Now we have one of the premier experts on Pi Zero 2 and on all things Pi, Jeff Geerling, joining us again, which is really a privilege every time. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor in Chief, Avram Pelch, and we're joined by Ash Hill, our resident Raspberry Pi expert, and and if we have less audience today, it's because probably folks in the UK, where a lot of people uh, tune in from, maybe thrown off because we normally air there at 7:30, but now this week it's 6:30 because we go by 2:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern time, and there's a slight time gap now, difference in the time difference because of daylight savings time. In the US, I think Sunday daylight savings time ends. Does it end or begin? Fall back. Anyway, we go back an hour. Therefore, 2:30 next week will be 7:30 in the UK, and we'll all be back to relative normal. Uh, but Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. How have you been?
I've been great. I don't remember how long it's been since I've been on, but it's always fun. And I did watch the episode with Eben. Unfortunately, I will not be as cool or awesome as him, nor will I look like Jason Statham. But some
Yeah,
people say I look like Steve Buscemi, so that's not too bad, I guess.
but you do have a better background. Uh,
Yeah. Well, I don't think that he spends a lot of time doing any kind of YouTube broadcasting.
Nah, I don't think so. Also, he has a cat that jumps on his laptop. So so
Yeah.
that is that is definitely a problem. But so you've been playing with the Raspberry Pi Zero 2W for a while now. How long have you had it?
So I actually got one of them a few months ago. This was like early in this process, and it was I don't remember which one, but it had different text on the back. That's how old it was. And Raspberry Pi. So some people don't know this, but like most companies, Raspberry Pi will send out units to people who kind of put them through their paces and start testing them and doing things on them because they want to avoid situations that they had in the past where they release a product and there's some glaring flaw like the USB-C power connection on the Pi 4, the original version that came out, or the camera flash incident where you'd take a picture of it and you'd have flash on your camera and that would reboot the Pi. Little things like that happen. I mean, I say little things because technically in hardware it is a little bug that needs to be fixed, but it can be a big glaring issue. So Raspberry Pi sends out these units to early reviewers and people who will do a lot of tests on them. So I installed some different apps on it. I set up different things on it. The biggest thing that I kept running into in all my testing was that RAM limitation, the 512 megs of RAM that's built into this chip. Um, Everything else, it was like, man, this is so much better than the Pi Zero, but that RAM kept limiting me on a lot of the things that I was going to try with it. Um,
Yeah, I think everyone can kind of agree that that's a feature that we all would have liked to have seen, was to at least go up to a gigabyte of RAM. That would really be helpful. I know that Evan has said that it has something to do with how they're popping, how they do the chip, where the RAM is actually part of the SoC, and it has to be, and so therefore they it requires a lot more, or it's not possible to up that from 512 at this point,
yeah,
which is yeah.
from what I understood from reading the different forum posts and things is, so uh, I don't have the X-ray image to show you, but basically inside of this new chip on it, this is called the RP3A0-AU. It's a chip it's still the same silicon, so it's the same processor that's from the Pi 3 and 512 megabytes of RAM. the RAM is stacked on top of the SoC, and the 512 megs comes in a single die, but a gig and any more than that comes in 2 dies, and they couldn't figure out a way to stack that all and package it in an economic and small form factor like this to fit on this board. And that's always been the story with the Pi Zero, is how much can they fit on this tiny footprint. And when they designed the Pi Zero 2, they wanted it to be hardware compatible, so the ports are all in the same location. There's one small difference. Some of these test pads on the back are different, and composite video doesn't have a header anymore. I think I still have, yeah, this is the original Pi Zero, not the W version. Actually, this is like the Pi Zero 1.3 with the camera header. The original Pi Zero didn't even have a camera header on it, I don't think. But it had these little headers for run and TV composite output. The Pi Zero 2 doesn't have those, so there are some projects that have to adapt and get those connections through the back. But they had that issue because the RAM chip doesn't come in a variety that has one die, at least for the old LPDDR2 RAM that's used for this processor. So that was the big issue there. And I mean, there's also cost, obviously. I think Raspberry Pi favors simplicity in the product lineup over the complexity that you see from some of the clones. I know some people point out like the Radsa Zero and some other products, they have multiple options, and you can get anywhere from like 512 to 4 gigs of RAM. Well, first of all, they actually put the RAM somewhere else on the board to save the space and kind of bypass that issue of stacking the RAM on top. And secondly, they have a lot of SKUs, a lot of different varieties that you can sell, and customers have to pick, like, do I want this and this, or do I want that feature? Do I want the faster Wi-Fi? So it makes the buying experience more complex. And I think Raspberry Pi has made that conscious choice to say, no, we're just going to have one version. It's going to be great for a lot of use cases, but not all the use cases. And that's fine with me. For a person like me, I'd like to have more options, but I understand why there's only one option.
Yeah, no question. So what are some of the things? So first of all, it's pretty cool that you were able to X-ray it, and I want to show folks, because I can pull it up, the X-rays that you took here. So how did you manage to get access to an X-ray machine, by the way?
So the first thing that I was trying to do was get an old dental X-ray machine, but there were two problems. One is the resolution is okay, but not great. Like you'd probably be able to see that little Raspberry Pi hidden in the ball grid array that's inside the chip. Unfortunately, it was hard to get a good one on eBay for a price that was not horrible. And the second part was getting a digital adapter for it, or finding ways to develop film and get it in the computer. That was all kind of complicated. There are some people that have done that in the past, and I don't remember if it was Adafruit or somebody else had a blog post about doing that and scanning a Pi with it. And but I just figured that was not something that I wanted to get too far into, especially since X-rays are potentially dangerous to my body, and if I do it wrong, I could end up with permanent damage. And I am wearing this red shirt. I am not Redshirt Jeff today, but I'm wearing this red shirt in honor of him. And he would love to do that kind of stuff, and maybe he will someday. But the second option was to get an actual digital X-ray scan or a CT scan of the board, and they make these specialized scanners for it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I looked it up, and they start at about $500,000, so that was out of the budget. But I did find that there were a few companies in the U.S. that you can send them your board and work with them basically one-on-one. Typically in pre-COVID times, you would fly there and you'd sit there with them and reposition it, get pictures and stuff. And a lot of companies like Raspberry Pi probably, I don't think they own one of these scanners, but they probably have access to one. And when you're manufacturing the board, when you get these pictures, you can zoom way in and look at the pads underneath all the chips and make sure that they're flowing correctly. Sometimes your design can have problems, or the manufacturing facility might have too much dirt in their solder, or might not have enough cleanliness, and you end up with problems because the solder job is bad. So X-rays are helpful for that. But in my case, I just wanted to see what was inside. I wanted to see, I really wanted to see the chip and the little pins in the chip and see how it was stacked. And of course, this is before the launch. So I knew nothing about the board, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I see this, and I noticed that little Raspberry Pi logo hidden in the ball grid array. I was like, oh, this is so cool. I want to share this stuff. So when it launched, I was like, oh, here's my blog post. It's so cool. And I noticed that the Raspberry Pi official blog post had all the same information and even more because they had access to the design files. So they had a really cool graphic of how it worked. And I'm like, well, I saw it too, but I guess since they designed it, they can reveal more than I can.
That's still real. It's still really, really impressive that you were able to get that. It's always cool when you can look inside and see the things that I don't know you're not supposed to see, so to speak. So, what are some of the projects that you've used this on where you've noticed a big difference from the original Pi Zero?
Well, one thing is that the Wi-Fi is, I forget if it's 35 or 50% faster or something. I do a lot of projects with
Hmm.
the camera, HQ camera or the regular camera, where I have it taking pictures and dumping those off to my computer or to a cloud drive or something, so I can do time lapses or just observations. Having that faster Wi-Fi is noticeable. Like instead of being like, I'm going to start this copy tonight and I'll see how it is in the morning, it's more like I'll start it now and in a couple hours later it'll be done. If you're doing a few gigabytes of photos or something like that.
That's really interesting to hear because when we had Evan on, we asked him about the Wi-Fi, and he said it should be. I mean, they use a slightly different chip, but that he expected performance to be the same.
Yeah, so the thing with the Wi-Fi is it is the same, it's almost identical, the chip. It's just I think that they changed the manufacturer from Broadcom to Synaptics. And that was a problem I had in one of the builds that I did. The driver or the firmware for that specific chip is different because of the new chip. And so it was changed like 3 or 4 months ago. It's funny. Here's a little secret if you love spying on Raspberry Pi, because Raspberry Pi has firmware on GitHub and their kernel development is on GitHub, every once in a while there might be a little commit that sneaks in there that's like, oh, new driver for this Wi-Fi chip. I think somebody even commented, because some people follow this and they're like, what is this change for? It's like, none of our current Raspberry Pis use this Wi-Fi chip. Why did you put that in there? There was a change a few months ago that added that into the firmware. And if you had an older build of PiOS, or if you had an older build of RetroPie, which was the case for me, that Wi-Fi driver wouldn't load, and so you wouldn't get Wi-Fi. So I got the new driver in the weekly build of RetroPie that fixed the problem for me. Um, but the chip is the same, but the processor that uses it also interfaces with that chip over whatever internal buses it uses. And since the SoC is a lot faster, it can interface a little bit better with the Wi-Fi. And so far in all my testing, I was able to get at least 20 to 30% faster Wi-Fi on the exact same network with the same test conditions, same PiOS build and everything. It's still a lot slower than the Pi 4. So if you're expecting to get like super speed Wi-Fi, you're not going to get that with the Pi Zero. And the biggest problem is that it uses a 2.4 gigahertz network, which is not bad. And it actually, the signal can be a little bit better than a 5 gigahertz network in some cases, but it's a lot slower. So you're not going to get that massive speed up that you can get with the Pi 4, which, massive speed up, I say, to like 100 megabits from like 30 megabits. It's massive in the Pi world, but when I go over on my laptop, my Mac, it can get like a gigabit of Wi-Fi now with Wi-Fi 6. So it's big in Raspberry Pi terms.
So, have you? What are some of the? So, obviously, the Wi-Fi has been better. Has that helped you with, besides camera use? Has that helped you with anything like web surfing, streaming video, anything like that?
A little bit. I mean, most things that you do on the Pi, like the best thing is the CPU in the Pi. In the old one, it used the same CPU that was in the original Pi. And for anybody that worked on an original Pi a lot, you just remember like things were just slow. And that's the same way on the Pi Zero. And there's just so many little things that are better because everything is a little faster and the CPU is way faster. Like boot up takes 30 seconds instead of 90, something along those lines. These aren't exact numbers, but it's pretty close. Um, and the Wi-Fi being faster means you can load in videos a little faster and things like that. Um, I did a little bit of testing. I don't use the Pi too much as a desktop device. I use it more for servers and time-lapse cameras and projects and things like that. But from what I've seen, it can do pretty well with anything 480p or 720p on the desktop. The original Pi Zero would struggle a little bit on that. And it can play back 1080p and some 4K, but you start getting into weird issues. And really, the Pi Zero W didn't have a huge issue loading 720p or 480p streaming content. But all that stuff kind of comes into play when I built this guy, which is the Null 2. Um, this is a portable gaming handheld, and I'm actually after this uh, after this stream is over, I'm going to be going back to working on the video for this, which is coming out tomorrow morning. But this is a gaming handheld that was built for the Pi Zero W, and it has like a 3.2-inch screen. It has a 1,000 milliamp battery that goes for about 2 hours. It has a headphone amp and stereo speakers, which I love. A lot of these builds just have a little mono speaker, so you don't get to enjoy some of those fun games in as much clarity. And it has all the buttons that you'd need for older games. But anyway, when I built this with the original Pi Zero, it couldn't play a lot of the games that it can on the Zero 2. And if you recorded footage of the screen recording and things like that, getting it on and off is a little slower, and copying large files to it was a little slower. So the Pi Zero 2 makes that all a lot faster, and it makes pretty much all the games from like Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo and earlier. All those games are going to play 60 frames per second all day. Newer games for PlayStation 1 are actually pretty good too. Most of them were 60 frames per second, but Nintendo 64 on all Raspberry Pis is a little hard to emulate. So, but it's playable on here. It wasn't playable on the original Pi Zero.
Yeah, that's fair. I know Les had tried it and found that PS1 could play. Somewhere behind me, I won't bore you guys with reaching back to find it. I have a what's it called? A retro flag, which is something a little bit like that, which looks like a Game Boy,
Mm-hmm.
and you put there's a spot for Raspberry Pi Zero in that, and of course you run it with RetroPie. So presumably you could do a lot better in terms of playing higher end games, although the form factor is not ideal for playing non Game Boy games, but you can.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the biggest thing right now is a lot of people have already started getting Pi Zero 2s in the mail, and they try to load RetroPie on it and it doesn't work, or parts of it don't work, and that's because the image for RetroPie is currently built for Pi Zero and Zero W, and then Pi 2 and 3, and then Pi 4. If you try loading the Pi Zero image, it won't load at all because the Pi Zero 2 has a new kind of firmware that it needs. If you try the Pi 2 and 3 image, it actually boots, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work. And if you try Pi 4, it won't work. But if you get the weekly build of RetroPie, it does, everything works on it, which is great. Uh, um, and for this build, I actually had to do some more work because the screen uses a different interface. The speakers and the headphone amp and audio amplifier need to be enabled, and volume control was a little bit interesting on it too. But like I said, I have a video on that coming out tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So subscribe to my YouTube channel for that.
that's amazing. So what is that called?
This is the Null 2, and so it's tough. Like there are tons of different RetroPie gaming builds like this. The Null 2, I liked it mostly because it was more simple, the whole build of it, and it was 100% DIY. So I soldered in the board, I soldered in the battery and the connectors and everything. You basically get a PCB and most of the parts, except for the battery, because shipping batteries is hard, especially for shipping from somewhere international. And then you get the case cut out by an acrylic laser cutting company, or if you have access to a laser cutter, you can cut it yourself. Or there's a 3D printed case that you can download files for, or a wood case that you can cut wood out too and do that. Or you can even mix and match. I know online some people have done like the middle part is wood and the outer part is acrylic, and you can basically make it look however you want. I really enjoyed building this, and I hope that comes through in the video. The problem with the Null 2 is that it's one guy who's putting together these kits. So every month or two, he'll make another batch, and he actually just made another batch, I think 2 or 3 days ago, of 50, and they sold out in about 30 minutes. So I think he's going to try to build a bigger batch before Christmas at some point. But you can sign up on Tindy to get notified when that comes out. But the website is like null2.co.uk, I think.
That's impressive that it sold out so fast.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fun. The thing is, some people might buy this thinking like, oh, 10 minutes and you put it all together and plug it in. It's like, no, there's some interesting things. Like there's this type of soldering where you set the Pi down and then you have to solder in place on top of the board, which is a little weird. There's no headers. And you're dealing with a battery, so you need to know how to deal with a lithium ion battery safely. So this isn't a build for somebody who's never done any electronics before. It's for somebody who knows at least basic soldering. And you can kind of stretch your wings a little bit because there's a surface mount resistor that you have to solder on, the battery you solder in. There's a lot of different things like that that are just, they might be slightly new for you. And the other thing, I'd never done anything with acrylic welding before. And it was a lot easier than I thought it would be, but it was also daunting because everything's like, oh, don't breathe this air, you're going to die after you open the bottle and all that stuff. So it's obviously not quite that bad, but I did have really good ventilation. I kept Redshirt Jeff far away from this build.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are some of the other things that you've tried with it? Have you tried any machine learning things?
That's one thing I haven't done yet. I do have, I've been playing around a lot with the compute module with the HQ camera. I did a video, kind of a silly video on putting this, attaching it to my leaf blower and making it so that when Redshirt Jeff entered my office, it would, I was about to say it would blow him, but it would blast some air at him. And I was going to try doing this on the Pi 02. I just haven't had time for that. I do want to see how many frames per second I can get with something like face detection. I'm guessing it'll be around 1, not huge, but it might be enough now with the 02 versus the 01 where you could use it in some of these projects and get that better power consumption. Because the CM4 does use a lot of power. So if you're planning on doing a battery with this or a Pi 4 or something, the battery's not going to last that long. Or if you want to do solar power, you might need 2 panels with the Pi 4 versus 1 panel or a smaller panel for the Pi 0W.
Wow. There's a lot of really cool things you can do. I'm gonna make sure we post your channel here where folks can easily see it. Of course, the easiest thing is to just search for Jeff Geerling. Yeah. So what are some of the other things that you want to try with this that you haven't tried yet?
It's mostly some of the projects that I already have a Pi running, getting it into a more compact case. And I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on these other projects. Like, for instance, right now I actually have a lot of things running on my rack of Raspberry Pis. I have a little network rack in my basement now, just because I've had so many new projects coming in, and I put an actual UPS battery supply to protect it, which worked great. We had a power outage for about an hour and a half a few weeks back, and everything, my whole network stayed up and running. I had Wi-Fi, and I had Starlink internet access in case the cable went down. But there are some things like when I go on vacation, I have a VPN that I can get back to my home internet through, and that runs on a Raspberry Pi 2 using Pi VPN. But I do want to have like a little Pi I can pop onto a network wherever I'm on vacation, and then it'll have Pi-hole running, because it's funny that, whenever it's more rare for me to leave the home nowadays with COVID and everything. But when I'm out, I like pop open the internet, and I don't have a browser extension running. I just have the Pi-hole at my home network, and I'll go to a website and I'm like, whoa, this is so different now. And I know Tom's Hardware also has some ads on the site and things too. So Tom's Hardware looks a little bit different sometimes.
Yeah, we have just a few ads.
But there are some websites that go from like, oh, I can read an article to like, there's a paragraph and an ad, a paragraph and an ad, and you're like, I can't even read this anymore. You guys aren't that bad.
Okay. See, I could go talk about this all day, but I won't bore anybody with that. Just to say, those of us who are in publishing, we kind of have to say the serenity prayer over the ads on our site. Like, we have unless you're a very small publisher, you probably have an ad team that decides these things. And so,
yep.
And so we just, if somebody complains about the ads, we say kind of not a lot we can do about it, unless the ad, there's something really like physically wrong with the ad, like malfunctioning. And, what can I say? I understand why people use ad blockers in Pi-hole, but personally, I don't use them because I hope that people don't use them when they're visiting our site. So it's because it helps, for better or worse. They help pay the bills. So I don't use them when I visit other people's sites. That being said, I totally understand why people want to use it, and it's very interesting technology. And I would encourage people who use it to just think about which sites you might want to put on your clean list. We have a question from Maker Melissa's lab. What is the Redshirt Jeff thing?
So it's funny. Redshirt Jeff came about last year during one of my videos. I just happened to be wearing a red shirt. It had nothing to do with any desire to make Redshirt Jeff a character. But when I was wearing a red shirt in one of the clips where I was like running around with a flamethrower, not a flamethrower, I don't have one of those, unfortunately, just a butane torch or something, acting like I was going to break something. Someone said, "Oh, you got to keep Redshirt Jeff away from your Raspberry Pi," or something along those lines. It was a comment. So that comment brought about this Redshirt Jeff character. And now whenever I'm going to do something destructive or something that's could be visually interesting to electronics or to something in my workshop, I'll usually have Redshirt Jeff do that. So it's just a fun inside thing on my channel. And I figure that's one of the things, like, there are certain YouTube channels that I enjoy watching more, and it's mostly because the personality of the people on that channel or the person on that channel comes through a lot more. And so I try to make that happen on my channel. I know, like, there are a lot of good Raspberry Pi channels that have good data, and I watch a lot of them. There's, I see a lot of great videos that come out, but they're not super broadly appealing. And those YouTube channels, and some people don't care. That's fine. They just want to put the information out there. They want to do that service, and that's awesome. But I am making this YouTube channel and my books and things like that become my primary income, and to do that you have to appeal more and things. So Redshirt Jeff came out of that and is one of the in characters on my channel, and I have fun plans for the future. So again, subscribe. It's on the screen right now, so go there and subscribe.
I thought it was a reference to Star Trek.
Well, so that's the other part. He hasn't died yet, but
yeah, it's like he's going to go do the risky stuff, so regular Jeff is okay.
He does end up doing the away missions where he desolders and breaks and heats things up and things like that. So there are often jokes about that in the comments, but I haven't really. I'm a little bit more of a Star Wars person, although lately with all the movies and things besides Mandalorian, it hasn't been quite as fun. Of course, Star Trek also hasn't really had a great track record in the past few years. A couple bright spots, but I was super excited about Picard, and it was like, I don't know where they're going with it, but
we always have the originals.
I just have two words for everybody, which is Lower Decks.
So I haven't even seen that, so that could be a bright spot.
Take
some time and watch
Lower Decks is fantastic. Everybody should watch Lower Decks. That's all I have. That's all I have to say about this matter. So speaking of great things, projects that people have done, Ash, it is the beginning of the month, so I know there are some great projects that we've seen this month, that we've seen the last month or so.
Yeah, for those who are unfamiliar, all week long at Tom's Hardware, we feature Raspberry Pi projects, and once a month, we will create a list of 10 of, I don't want to say the best ones, because they're all the best, but we do call it the best projects list. These are 10 that we think deserve a little bit more attention. So I wanted to show at least 3 of them to you guys here today to get you excited, but you can find the full list on tomshardware.com. So first, let me get my screen set up here. I wanted to show off, first of all, this Raspberry Pi 400 project. It was created by Pimoroni's Phil Howard. He turned the Pi 400 into a regular keyboard and mouse combo, so you can just plug in this keyboard computer into a regular computer and use it as a keyboard, which sounds like a downgrade, but I think it's such an upgrade because it's such a clever project, and you can still use it as the Pi 400. There's a way to switch back and forth, but I thought that was too clever to not mention right off the bat. That one was one of my favorites. And the other one I wanted to show you guys, if it'll load here. There we go. So it all started with the Simpsons TV, where we had that maker actually on our show a couple of weeks ago. But it started with that, and now everybody in the community is getting excited about their favorite shows and making tiny TVs shaped like things from that show that plays episodes of that show. And in this case, we have a Raspberry Pi powered BMO TV that plays Adventure Time episodes. And it has working buttons on the front. So if you're a fan of the show, that's a little bit of an exciting feature. You can actually use the buttons to navigate and change a few settings. That's pretty fun. And the other one I wanted to share with you guys was this really cool, I think it's really cool, maybe it's just me, but it's a Pico-powered dog ball launcher. Well, I guess any kind of ball, but the guy made it for his dog so that ideally he could drop a ball in himself, it'll launch the ball, and he can play. And what's neat about it is it kind of varies the speed and the distance that it ends up going. So it's not the same spot over and over that the ball is landing. And you could use that for all kinds of applications. Maybe you want to play tennis at home and you don't have, another person to play with. There's all kinds of ways that you could modify elements of that project into other projects. And so I thought that one was cool and I wanted to share it too. What do you guys think? Are you excited for some of these projects? Are there any that you maybe want to make yourself?
Well, it seems that BMO is a phenomenon, because we had Geeky Faye on the show the other day, and they are almost done with their BMO Octoprint now, and so I spoke with them, and they may come back on again in the near future to show us the final BMO.
That would be so cool.
So that would be cool. Oh, Greg says still kind of a fan of the Ragsa Zero as far as power, which I got 2 weeks ago, but doesn't have the support that RPI has. Jeff, have you used the Rag? I don't know how to pronounce this. Ragsa Zero.
Yeah, Radsa Zero. I have not actually used the Radsa Zero. I've seen all the reviews from other people using it, and it's faster, it's clocked higher, it has more RAM options. You can get Wi-Fi at 5 gigahertz, so you can get faster Wi-Fi on it. It's like a lot of the Raspberry Pi clones where the hardware level is better. There's no doubt about it. But the software support is always going to be less. I have like a couple Odroids, I have a Banana Pi, I have some other ones. The hardware is always great, but it's just like the first day is just you're just trying to get it working. Like with the Raspberry Pi, the first 10 minutes you get it working, and then you start doing things with it, and then you might have problems, and you go to the forums and find answers. With a lot of these other boards, usually it's like you can't get the image running, and then you go to their image, and it's like Ubuntu
Community
14.
just isn't there.
Yeah, so that's been my struggle with most of those boards.
The thing is, I want to run Raspberry Pi OS. So if one of those ran Raspberry Pi OS, it would be a more compelling option, but I don't really want to go and try and shoehorn some special build of Ubuntu on there or run Android on it or something like that. So
yeah, even Ubuntu, now they officially support the Raspberry Pi as a target. So their official Ubuntu version will work on the Raspberry Pi, and it has a lot of the hardware little overlays and things that you need. Whereas for all these other boards, you're on your own, A lot of times you'll end up compiling their own stuff and again, working through the forums, which sometimes aren't even English language, which if you're not English speaking, that might not be as big of a deal, but I know for me it is.
It's just too much. The support, the community is why nothing will overtake Raspberry Pi, because the community is there. So even if somebody comes out with something that benchmarks faster, I think a great example of this is what's happened with NVIDIA Jetson, right? Jetson Nano is faster for machine learning, and this is supported by a major company, NVIDIA. It's not some small company, but the eLinux that you have to use, it's called, I think they're still calling it eLinux on there. It's just there's the forums, the projects, it's just not there.
Well, and like Intel even attempted with their Edison and all their boards. Like everybody's done it, but unlike Raspberry Pi, it wasn't like the thing that they do. So it was never their focus. It never got the kind of the community rolling behind it. They didn't have the internal resources to support it. And it's sad because sometimes like the person in the company that works on it, you can tell that they love it and they really want to see it succeed, but it won't happen, Like Raspberry Pi at this point is the one to beat if you want to do single board computers that are under $500. And they even win that market against a lot of $300-$400 single board computers, again because of that support. Right. Ash, you mentioned some of those other projects too. There was another thing that I'm planning on thinking about at some point. I do have an Ender 3v2 printer, and I think, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Gina from Octoprint. She tested the Pi Zero 2W on her Prusa printer and said it works great. It does camera streaming and all that kind of stuff. So I'm thinking about building it into my printer or attaching it more closely, because my Pi 4 is kind of just hanging out next to the printer, and it's
You
just it's
should.
terrible.
You should. There's I'm going to plug HowChu, another website I've written for in the past. I write for them sometimes some Pi content, and one of the makers there, Zach, has a 3D printer, and he has a guide, I'm pretty sure, on how to power your Raspberry Pi from the same line as your printer. So like you boot everything up in one go. And
Yeah.
there's also another one on how to add an LED strip. So if you haven't done that yet, Avram, you may want to look into that.
Yeah, I have to. I have this. It's not a Creality. It's an Elegoo Neptune 2 behind me, which is I guess you could call it an Ender 3 clone. That is quite popular because it's actually a little cheaper. It's like $169, and I want to look into whether there's a way I could build the Pi into it. First thing, I have to get the BL touch sensor working on it so that it can do that.
Mine is still sitting in the box after a year. I've had it sitting there, and like every time I sit there and do the alignment, I'm like, I could just put this on there and stop doing this.
Yeah,
but it's still sitting in the box.
Yeah, I just have to find some time and space to like turn it over and plug that in.
Yep.
But anyway, so by the way, speaking of which, if anybody who's in our audience is a 3D printing expert, we are actually looking for more 3D printing writers. So please drop me a line you can email me avram.pillage@futurenet.com if you because we are expanding our 3D printing coverage. We need help there. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We will be back at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. UK time next week. Thank you so much to Jeff for coming on and enlightening us as usual. And we will see you all again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.